everybody. I'm Charles over at Teachers Discovery. I'm the one that keeps emailing you all the time about everything. I am so glad you could all be here. And I'm super, super excited because this is probably one of the largest groups that I've seen so far for any of our online events. So I'm really excited that you're all here. And I'm super excited to introduce Bryan Kandel, who's going to be hosting the next 4 events. It's going to be the 4th Thursday of every month for the next 4 months, and makes today part 1. It's 7 o'clock. So Bryan, if you'd like to go ahead and kick things off.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Good evening. Welcome to the first in our series. See a lot in the chat about storms and weather. It looks like here in Ohio, I think we were kind of right on the line, and right now it looks like rain. Looks like we're just getting rain tonight. So I think we might be spared from what a lot of you are getting, but welcome. So glad to be here tonight and for the next 4 months, 4 different sessions over the next 4 months. Let me grab my screen for us here to get going. We're gonna do about 45 minutes here, and then with some time for questions afterwards. I am Bryan. I teach Spanish here in Canton, Ohio at Perry High School. I teach level 3, level 4, and AP Spanish 5. I've been teaching for 18 years. And so let's jump in here. This is session 1, setting behind the scenes of an effective CI class. We will define CI, comprehensible input, discuss mindset, realistic goals, planning, preparation, classroom culture, other keys to making CI work, all of that in about 45 to 50 minutes. But really, I intentionally kept the content kind of slim so that we don't have to rush. A lot of times in these hour-long sessions, you really feel like you're rushing, but I think we'll be able to get through this pretty well. There is my website here, which if you want to contact me, as Chuck was talking about earlier, he will make this presentation available. And there's the email address and everything. If you want to contact me there, I'd love helping. I'm a little busy right now, a lot going on, but I'd love being able to help. I so appreciated people that helped me as I was getting started with CI, and would love to help you out if possible. Our other sessions next month, March 24th, we'll talk about exposure, providing exposure, a lot about using the target language. We're going to talk about that a little bit tonight and how important that is, but we'll dig into the specifics next month about how we do that effectively, because it's way easier said than done. Yeah, everybody kind of agrees we should use our target language as much as possible, but how do you do that? So we'll dig into that in March. Then in April, we'll talk a lot about reading. And I know that a lot of teachers who are here tonight are here because of Flangu, because you've used that and you found that to be an excellent resource.
What?
And sorry, I don't remember. Yeah. Anyway, because of Flangu and reading, we know reading is a great way to provide input for students. So we'll really focus on reading on that April date. And then in May, which is crazy to think about May already, but it is 4 months away, 3 months away. We will talk about other ways we provide input: storytelling, music, videos. And we'll talk about this tonight too, but we can provide input, and we should vary the way that we provide input to our students. So we'll get into some of those other ways beyond reading that we can do that. But for tonight, again, we're talking about mindset, and we're talking about definitions. And really, this is super important. We may not get into a lot of specifics as far as activities tonight. We may not get into what's practical, but this is essential. It's essential to understand why we do comprehensible input, how we do it. I'm going to present this tonight as an introduction. And I know that whenever you do any kind of workshop or session, that teachers are coming from all different kinds of backgrounds. Some of you maybe are brand new to this idea. Maybe you're just finding out what comprehensible input is at all, or you're starting to use it, or maybe you're questioning whether you want to do it or not, or maybe you've been using CI for longer than I have. I'm going to treat this like it's an introduction, but if you have been using it or you are familiar with it, I think there'll be a lot of value. I think as CI teachers, we all do that a lot. We can go talk to anybody or see a workshop and pick things up, even if it's something that's introductory and we've been using it for a while. So another comment, again, Flangu is something that I know a lot of you are using. Flangu can work if you're not a CI class, and you can be a CI class and not use Flangu, but the two of them do fit really well together, especially any kind of reading, especially individual free reading where students have a choice of what they're going to read and they're going to be reading on their own, fits really well in a CI class. And I think that's why a lot of you are here, because you've gotten into CI because of Flangu, or you're starting to hear about it. And so you want to know more, and you want to know how you can, the value that you're getting from Flangu, how you can translate that to your entire class. So that's what we're going to get into today. I do have a gift for you at the end, so stick around for a free gift. It's not really that exciting. Don't get your hopes up too high. But, and if you've seen workshops of mine before, you might already have this. So don't get too excited, but I do have something that's fun for you at the end of the evening. So let's talk a little bit about CI, or comprehensible input. Let's talk about what it is and what it is not. What it is and what it's not. What it is a shift, and that's a big word, a shift in mindset, goals, and approach to teaching languages. When we talk about a shift, we're comparing CI to what we'll usually call traditional methods. Now, traditional methods, CI methods, everybody has their own way that they do things. Traditional might mean something to one teacher and something else to a different teacher. CI might mean one thing to one teacher and something else to another teacher. But if we think about what maybe some of us who are a little older, what we did when we were in school, which was a lot of study of the language, a lot of drills, textbooks, knowledge-based learning about the language. This is a shift. This is different. It's important to understand that CI changes our goals and our mindset. It's not just about different activities. We have to change what we're hoping for, what we're looking for, what we're expecting to really make CI work. It's an attempt to provide as much input or exposure to the language as possible. That's what I do every day in class. I'm just trying to, I'm a Spanish teacher. I'm trying to get my students to read or hear as much Spanish as possible. Now I'm trying to do that lots of different ways to keep them engaged, and there's lots of strategies to do, but that's what's behind most of what we're doing, trying to provide input. It is a belief that students' skills grow from comprehending input more than from studying language. We are not, I don't teach linguistics. Some of you maybe took linguistics courses in college or are very interested in that. And it's fascinating when you study a language and you study the linguistics, and maybe you have students that are going to do that as they go on to college. That's fascinating, but that's not what we do. We're not linguistics teachers. We're not studying the language to know and understand it as much as we are communicating, as much as we are trying to build skills. And this word is important here too, belief. We really have to believe and buy into the fact that when our students hear and read, when they get input of the language, that actually grows their skills more than studying about the language. Now, what comprehensible input is not, because sometimes there are misconceptions, sometimes there are different definitions. It's not an unorganized, chaotic lack of structure. Sometimes people think that's what it is. Maybe you've seen teachers and maybe that's what it was in their classroom, or maybe you've heard that, or you think about the old TPR gestures, which can be a part of CI, or you've heard about the silly stories, which can be a part of CI, but you think that there's a lack of structure. There is a lot of freedom. There is a lot of openness to what we do, especially as we go up in levels, but there is structure to it. I'm one of the most structured teachers I know. I have yearly plans that I adapt at different points through the year and change. I have weekly plans that I make every weekend that are very detailed. I adapt them every day. I get to school super early and I plan out every minute of every class. So there is structure in comprehensible input classes. So if that the lack of structure scares you, don't worry, you can structure what you do. It is not silly stories and nothing more. And this is similar. This is a misconception that some people have, that it's all silly stories. It can be a part of it. I use silly stories. I use goofy, funny, fun, personalized things, especially in the lower levels. But I also teach AP, and my CI leads to AP, and we certainly aren't doing silly stories all the time. So that's a part of it, but that's not all of it. We can talk about global issues. We can talk about important events. We can do all kinds of things in the target language. It's not a passing fad. And I think you've probably are beginning to see this. It's, I'm fortunate enough to teach in Ohio. where our conferences are just always about CI and how we provide more input, and our publications are about input. And not everybody uses it, but it's very accepted here in Ohio. If you see what Teachers Discovery is doing, they are pushing input and comprehensible input. It's been around for years and years. You can research the science of it. It's not going anywhere. It's not a passing fad. Now, again, not everybody uses it. That's fine, but it's not something new and passing. And then finally, it's not a magic button that turns bad teachers into good teachers. And that's obviously a kind of a funny definition. What's a bad teacher? What's a good teacher? We're all bad teachers some days. We're all good teachers some days. But it's not something that's going to immediately transform you as a teacher. I think good teachers, the keys to teaching well are preparation and delivery. How much time you spend preparing every lesson, and then can you get up in front of a group of kids and deliver it? That's the same if you're teaching traditionally with a textbook, CI, no textbook, whatever you're doing, those are the keys. So now I have heard a lot of testimonials of teachers who wanted to quit. They didn't like what they were doing. They were very frustrated with what their students were able to do. And then CI really helped them, kind of refreshed them, renewed them in their teaching. But it's not without effort. It's not a magic button. It takes work, and it takes a lot of continuous growing in your skills and with the students. So be careful with that. What we're going to come back to a lot here tonight is that we are with CI, we're valuing communication more than we're valuing knowledge. Again, we don't teach linguistics. Linguistics is fascinating. That's a little bit of what we do, but knowledge is not our goal. So what I want to look at tonight are what I call the 12 pillars of CI, the 12 pillars of CI. And I have this document here that has it's kind of like a notes document. I don't know if this is something that you're interested in filling in as we go. You can do that. I will, let's see if I can just throw the link here in the chat. If you want to print it, and there it's in the chat now. If you want to print it and fill it in, if you want to fill in the Google slide as we go, maybe make a copy and fill it, not Google slide, Google Doc as we go. If you want to disregard it completely, that's fine. But that's just something if you want to follow along. You don't need it like for credit for this workshop or anything. But we're going to go over these 12 pillars of comprehensible input. And the first one is this: a reduction in quantity. So when we shift to teaching with CI, we value internalization more than superficial knowledge. Again, coming back to the idea, we're not interested necessarily in how much the students know. Knowledge is a part of it, but we are way more interested in what they have internalized and what they can do. CI is based on repetition. In order for a student to internalize language, a vocabulary word, a grammar concept, any kind of structure, they need to hear and read it thousands and thousands and thousands of times in order to internalize it. It's based on repetition. However, we are limited by the amount of time we have. My classes at my school are 40 minutes long. 40 minutes is very short. Even my AP classes, I teach 40 minutes a day. I've learned to get as much and not to waste a single minute, to get as much in as I can every day, because I just don't have very much time with my students. I wish I had hours. I wish I could have 3-4 different mods of classes and all that stuff like our math teachers get, but I don't. I have 40 minutes, which leaves 23 hours and 20 minutes of the day that most of my students are going to spend immersed in English. Part of that, they're sleeping, but they're probably dreaming in English. So I'm limited by the amount of time I have, but I want to repeat things over and over and over for kids. So what that means is I have to simplify what I'm doing. I can't keep those long lists of vocabulary words. I can't keep those long grammar explanations and notes. I can't keep all that and get enough repetition of it in the amount of time that we have. So what we have to do is simplify. This is something that's super important and is difficult to let go of. When you make this switch to CI, it takes time, and it's okay. It's difficult for me sometimes still after about 20 years of, 15 years of CI. But it's okay. It's okay to simplify what you do. So number 2 is this: if we're going to simplify, what are we going to teach? What are we going to cover? Number 2, the second pillar is a focus on high frequency language. If we only have so much time, we can only do so much. We need to ask ourselves, what words and phrases are used most often and most needed for communication in my class? We're going to look at this in a second. There's something called Super 7, which are the 7 most common, most useful verbs. We want to focus on that as much as we can. I'll show you this list here in a second too. And you'll get this presentation. You can click on this link later if you want. Some common actions, which are really easy to internalize without using a lot of time and are really valuable for everything you do. But what I found, the best way to know what is high frequency is to teach your class. And this you'll do year after year. But you start to realize what phrases and what words are most used and most valuable. I actually have a little note that I have on this little slide out drawer of my desk that I'm constantly writing notes down of what phrases I want to try to get more repetition in for class, because when we talk about it, the students want to say something all the time and they can't, or I want to say something to the students and I'm constantly defining it on the board or avoiding it, trying to find another way to say it. So it's those words, it's those things that I need often that I'm going to start to teach and be deliberate about getting repetitions from. Here's the idea of the Super 7. And this has Spanish and it has the English. Once is, there are, likes, is, goes, has. We want to rep those. Those are used a lot. One thing you'll discover as you work on simplifying and reducing quantity is you can do a lot with a little. There's statistics like it's 300 or 500 words. You can do almost everything. So especially with these, and there are other lists that go up to like 16, you can do a lot with these concepts. So focus on them. These are what you want students to hear a lot of. These are high frequency, very valuable, but not necessarily easy for students because they're kind of almost abstract ideas. So we want to rep them over and over. Yes, this is third person singular. Yes, it is different. Like in Spanish, va is different than ir. To go is different than goes. He likes is different than I like. We are is different than he or she is. That's true. Those are all different. Those all need their own set of repetitions. Yes, your students are going to start with a very basic third person vocabulary. That's okay. That's another one of those things where you have to let go of some things in order to simplify and build communication and build skills. We will get to where we have internalized different forms and things. The other thing I want to show you here is this list of common actions. Set that out of the way. And again, this is in Spanish. If you're not a Spanish teacher, if you need this in English, let me know, or you can look it up, or you hopefully would know it. But this is something that I start with all the time. I haven't done Spanish 1 in a while, but I used to do it. A couple years ago, I did a community class with some older, it was all ladies, these older ladies, retired ladies who had no Spanish experience. They came in the afternoon after school. We did this class and I did this with them. And I don't know if you know, as we get on in years, learning a new language is more difficult. We started with this. We started with some gestures of all these actions that we could do a lot with. And within hours, we were communicating. We were talking about lots of different things. So the list are these actions. And as it says here, these can be internalized using gestures. I don't do a lot of gestures in my classes. This is one time that I do, and it's very early on in the class, in the year. We internalize these ideas. They're not all necessarily super high frequency, but they're very valuable for what we're going to do in class. Talks, eats, runs, walks, sees, looks forward, drives, gets up, sits down, drinks. These actions are high frequency, and they can be internalized by repeating a lot and then using gestures to help us remember. You can draw, you can do all kinds of things, but those are high frequency actions that are good to get in. These Super 7 verbs are good to rep. So that's a start. And then you go with what you know, what you think students need to know a lot. It gets easier year after year after year to know what is high frequency, but we're going to simplify what we cover and we're going to focus on what is most often used. What's high frequency in your class may be different than my class. What's high frequency in your class might be different than somebody else in the same building. That's fine. There are certain things that we talk about. There are certain things that come up in one class and they understand that word way more than another class that I have. That's okay. High frequency. Here's something to help us kind of remember that. Think about this. Think about a list of all the places around town: the grocery store, the post office, the library, a church, a school, an airport, a list of all the different places around town. And the time that we would spend studying and learning those lists of all the places around town versus these phrases: he has a cat, he wants a dog, he goes to the pet store, he says. And think about the difference that after we spend about the same amount of time going over this entire list and these phrases, what can you do when you're done? Or what can you do after you've gone over all that? Here, we can, after we spend a lot of time studying a list of all the places around town, what we can do is list all the places around town. It's important to know those things, but that's not communication, that's a list. If we look at these phrases, which really, if we take he out, has, cat, wants, dog, goes, pet store, and even if we didn't want to do pet store, we could make that like Walmart, Dollar General, whatever, says. It's not a lot of words, but there's a lot that we can do here because these are high frequency words, and we can tell an entire story. We could tell a story for hours. Students could write long paragraphs after we've internalized some of these phrases. Because the other thing, and now this is what's a little different for some of us than others, is we have cognates. We can talk about elefantes, elephants, and we can talk about tigres, which are tigers. We can talk about supermercado, or like Walmart, like I said, PetSmart, Dollar General, Giant Eagle. We can use cognates there. So we can do a lot if we focus on that high frequency versus if we spend the same amount of time on a list of things. Number 3, the third pillar of CI is an unwavering commitment to target language. And as I mentioned at the beginning, this is something that we will really dig into next month in March, but I want to talk about it now. Again, we don't have a lot of time. We want our students getting as much input as possible. When we're speaking English, that's not input. We want to get them hearing as much as we can. We also want to create a culture of communication. We want to create a culture of using the target language. That first key of reducing quantity and this key of focusing on the target language must be linked. If we're going to reduce quantity, we have to use the target language, because this is what happens. Some teachers do when they get into CI is they buy into this idea of let's reduce, and then they talk English a lot. And now you're kind of missing out on both points. You're not studying anything and you're not getting a lot of input, and you're kind of stuck. Same thing kind of goes the other way. If we want to use the target language a lot, which we do, we can't do it unless we simplify. And so as we start to really reduce the amount that we're teaching, it becomes easier to use the target language. As we use the target language, we kind of have to reduce what we're teaching. Again, we'll dig into a lot in March. There are a lot of strategies to do that, but we need to remember the importance of shooting for 90% of that target language, or trying to use that target language as much as possible. I know I said levels 3 and 4 and 5. A lot of times people say, well, it's a lot easier for you to do the target language. I've done level 1 and 2. Like I said, I've done those community classes with people that had no experience, and we were using the target language from day 1, almost exclusively. It can be done if we simplify. For me, this is important. For me, it's goal number 1. Providing input in the target language is goal number 1. Because again, what happens for some teachers is they get to this conflict where I have this concept I want to teach, and I can't do it in my target language. And so what they do is they go to English. For me, if I have this concept I don't want to teach and I can't do it in my target language, I don't do it. Because breaking this rule of almost all Spanish is more important to me, because I want to simplify and just bombard them with Spanish that they can understand. Number 4, fourth pillar of comprehensible input is an emphasis on listening and reading. We want them to get input. Input comes from listening and reading. The teacher provides most written and oral input, but other sources are extremely valuable. I talk to my students a lot. I write things that my students read a lot, not necessarily all stories or articles or whatever. We read lots of different types of things. My voice is a lot of what we hear and read, but we live in an awesome world of opportunities of videos, audios, music, text, some that are created by teachers for students, some that are created by native speakers for native speakers that we have to maybe adapt or scaffold as we use those. But listening and reading is how my students spend nearly every minute of every class. We do a little writing, we do a little speaking for assessment and some output practice, but we're focusing on listening and reading. This goes back to that belief. I believe that my students get better at writing and get better at writing and speaking because of what they hear and what they read. Practice, we do some practice, especially in AP and level 4. It's okay to do some practice. You want to do some practice, but you don't get better from practice. And that's the belief that you have to get to. You get better from hearing and reading. And you also have to get students to buy into that and understand that. Most students aren't going to fight you too much on the idea of not writing or speaking too much more. So with a lot of listening and reading. So again, Flangu is awesome because it provides opportunities for students to read. Reading is awesome. We'll get into reading a lot in the 3rd session in April. Number 5, an emphasis on language use and not just recognition. This might seem like a contradiction. They're going to read and listen a lot, and now you're saying that we're focusing on use and not recognition. We provide that input, and this goes back to what I was just saying. We provide tons of input because we believe that it leads to better production, because we want improved language skills. Now, here's where this gets important. Covering and studying lead to superficial abilities and knowledge. If we cover a lot, we cover it quickly, we go through a lot of explaining in English, we learn. That's knowledge, and that's something, that's fine, but that's not our goal. We're not after knowledge, we're after skills. Here's one area where this is important to get students to buy in. They need to understand the importance of repetition and internalization, because what you get sometimes is students that will say, oh, I already know all these words. Or why do I need to study this? Or why do I need to read this or listen to this or whatever? They might want to start to disengage because they think, oh, this is simple. I already know this. But you have to get them, you have to buy in, and you have to get them to understand your goal is not to recognize. Your goal is to use. And for you to use, you have to internalize. And for you to internalize, you have to hear and read and use in authentic situations, in real, meaningful situations. Here's two metaphors that might help your students. Think about baking, because we're aiming for depth, not breadth or width or whatever. We're aiming for depth. Think about baking. Would you rather have an understanding of all the different styles of baking, all the different types of food, all the different appliances used to bake? Would you rather have an understanding of all that? Or would you rather be able to bake a delicious apple pie that you can eat and enjoy? And then move on to a blueberry banana chocolate nut muffin and know how to make that really well and eat it and enjoy it. Same thing with music. Would you rather know a lot of information about all the different types of instruments, the woodwinds and the brasses and the strings and the guitars and the drums and all that stuff? Would you rather know about all those instruments, or would you rather be able to play the clarinet very well and enjoy playing the clarinet and use it, and then maybe move on to the trumpet, and then maybe move on to the guitar? It's about depth. We want to simplify, but really internalize and be able to use. Number 6, a reduction in student work is a pillar. And this, again, is one that students don't fight you about. They're all on board with this. The job of a student, the student's role in the CI class, is to listen, actively listen. That doesn't just mean be quiet. That means engage. That means focus on every word I say, every word fellow students say, everything we read, everything we listen to, watch. They need to actively listen to comprehend. and let you know if they don't comprehend. That's important too. That's their job. When the student does their job and the teacher does his or her job, when everybody plays their roles, you don't have to work. You don't have to fill in worksheets. You don't have to study, because you're getting input, and input is working. Now, easier said than done because I thought that was going to be something that's going to be later. Because students tend to not listen. I mean, that's just, they're students. They're not going to listen. So we have to make sure that they are actively listening. We have to get them to buy into the whole system of that. Work in class or as homework contradicts the classroom culture. For me, classroom culture is super important. Our culture is one of communication. It's one of using Spanish. It's not one of sitting around and working on worksheets. We do that sometimes. We do writing, we do essays, we fill some things in, we do some writing sometimes. We do projects every once in a while. I feel like every year I do less and less and less projects because it's just time that we're not getting input. So it contradicts our classroom culture. And work needs to be defined as receiving input, listening, and reading. And again, students don't fight on that one. I don't do much homework. Even in AP, I don't do a lot of homework. Maybe you do, that's fine. Maybe you have a population where that works well. There's a lot of reasons I don't do homework. I do some homework, but I don't do a lot of it because, again, it goes against our culture of input. I feel like you don't get the same amount of effort on things outside of class as you do in class. You have all that Google Translate stuff. I focus on input for 40 minutes. We have 40 minutes. We're going to spend 40 minutes using Spanish every day. And I see a lot more growth there than trying to do work in class or outside of class. Number 7, an emphasis on, I can't put my thing, personalization. The content that we're teaching, providing input for, is language and culture. I want to teach the Spanish language. I want students to know about Spanish speaking culture. The context where we do that is the lives of the students. Language relates to them. Culture, we spend a lot of time comparing, which is an AP goal, so which is awesome, but it's also something that students like to do, compare other cultures to their own culture. As language teachers, we have this awesome, unique opportunity. We can connect with our students, and it's part of our curriculum. Like math teachers, they connect with their students as the good ones do, but it's before or after the lesson. For us, it is the lesson. Like that can be the lesson. We can use our target language, talk about students' activities, talk about their opinions, talk about their beliefs. We can include them in the stories that we tell, their experiences, their beliefs, their identities. It's part of what we do, and it's all part of the curriculum. We're going to talk here in a second about things being compelling. In order to maintain engagement, maintain attention from students, we need things to be compelling. Often, nothing is more compelling than classmates, than you, what you're interested in, what you believe, what your classmates did, what you're going to do this weekend, and so on. When students come into the Spanish classroom, again, I'm big on culture. When they step in, they kind of become another person. They become a Spanish speaker. That's not who they are when they leave or before they come in. So they change identity a little bit, but their identity, what they bring into the classroom, is super important in all that we do. And they need to understand that, and they do, and they appreciate that. Also, a lot of the materials that we do, students have input in. A lot of the reading, and we'll get into this with the reading in a couple weeks or a couple months, but a lot of the reading that we do, the students provide a lot of the details, and then I put it together, and that's what they read. I do a lot of storytelling at lower levels. Students provide a lot of the input. It's personal. So personalization is important. Number 8, this is kind of what I mentioned, a compelling or a constant search for compelling materials. If students don't engage, if they don't actively listen or read, there's no input. We're wasting time. Students tend to disengage. It's just what they do. And I can't blame them. Like they're in school for so long, especially those kids I get in the afternoon, like they've done so much. And then they have jobs and they have sports and theater, and they just do so much that their natural state is to disengage. So we can hold them accountable. We can force them to engage. I'm not very good at that. And I don't think that's the best strategy. I think the best strategy is to try to make them want to engage, especially because, again, I teach upper level Spanish. Nobody has to take the classes that I teach. They have to want to take that class. So they have to want to engage with the material. So we are constantly looking for things that are compelling. As a high school teacher, this is kind of not fair. It's just how it is. It falls on our students' abilities and skills, and their engagement becomes our responsibility. Not necessarily fair, but that's how it is. So when they're reading and when they're listening, I'm trying to have them read and listen to and watch things that are interesting, funny. Not everything has to be funny. Relevant to them, relevant to the world, debatable. There are some awesome things that really grab their attention if students have differing opinions. Personalized, as I mentioned before. And again, things that are funny in my class may not be funny in your class. Things that are relevant in my class may not be relevant in your class. One of the best ways that we do provide compelling materials is to know our classes. We really have to get to know our classes and start to know trends year to year to see what holds the interest of students. Number 9 is pretty similar. A variety of activities with the same purpose. We can't do the same thing all the time. Variety helps maintain engagement. This is what we're really going to focus on in week 4 of these sessions. Lots of different ways to provide input. Stories. I do storytelling. Some people don't do storytelling. You don't have to. You can be CI and not do any silly stories. That's fine. I like it. We do it some. Songs, jokes. I tell jokes every day. Videos, games, trivia questions we do every week. Discussions, reading things that are created by a teacher, reading things that are authentic. Those are all different activities that we do, and they all have the same purpose. Students are reading or hearing Spanish because, again, I believe that's what's going to make them better. And what happens when you start to vary and you start to do all these things that are compelling, students may engage and not even notice the input, which is fine. You know, eventually they start to realize, oh, all this stuff is making me better at Spanish. But especially early on, especially like trivia questions and games, like they just want to win. They want their class to win at trivia. They want to win the game. They like the song, whatever. They don't realize that it's input, but it's all these different activities with the same purpose. Number 10, there's a few more. Awareness of processing abilities. Again, CI requires a shift in goals. Our goal is not knowledge. Our goal is processing speed and ability. They're more important than knowledge. As students hear and read more language, they start to process. I see it. You probably see it too as you provide language input to your students. What I said at the beginning of the year, and they would be like, yeah. Now they get, oh yeah, they process faster. And here's why this is important. This is our goal, not knowledge. Knowledge is part of what we do. We're building more and more vocabulary, but we're trying to make them process faster, process better, and produce better. Point it out to students because sometimes they may say, oh, they may look at like a list and say, wow, we really haven't learned that many words this semester. Show them how much better and faster they can process because they've been hearing language. Also, you have to remember this because here's what happens. Yeah, you might know this quote from Theodore Roosevelt, that comparison is the thief of joy. This is super true in CI because what will happen is you will talk to other Spanish teachers or French teachers or language teachers, or your students will talk to students from another class in your building or another district, and they'll say, oh, that class knows how to do all the imperfect subjunctive conjugations, and I don't even know what that means. Or that class can say the whole alphabet, or that class can list all of the different jobs at the Supreme Court. I don't know. They know all this stuff that I don't know. Remember, that's not your goal. And because then you get tempted like, oh no, I got to do a unit where I cover and teach all this stuff. No, that's not your goal. Remember, point out to students that your goal is not knowledge. Your goal is to process faster and produce better. So be careful with comparison. Another kind of analogy that helps with the idea of processing. During COVID, a lot of classes got combined and warped, and you ended up with a lot of students in the same class with different abilities. And that happens all the time, but especially after COVID or during COVID. And so I was getting a lot of these questions about how do I deal with students at different levels in the same class? Well, when your goal is processing ability, everybody can grow because they all come in. It's like a train. Everybody gets on the train at a different station. This is especially true if you're doing like level 2, 3, or 4, and kids are coming from different level 1 and 2. Everybody gets on at a different place and they all get off at a different place, but their processing has improved. They have traveled along, this might be too much, but they've traveled along that track. And now they're not all necessarily at the same place with the same skills, but they've all improved. And so that kind of growth mindset fits really well with CI. 2 more, just about done here. An emphasis on experience. This is pretty simple. Memorable, engaging experiences help us internalize language. Sometimes this is even more important than repetition. It's memorable experiences with language makes it stick better than even hearing it a lot or studying it a lot. So we vary the activities we do. We do a lot of things that are fun. We do a lot of things that are debatable. We do a lot of things that are engaging, and we're moving, and we're doing all kind of different dynamic activities because a CI class is based a lot on experience, and that experience is engaging and it helps us internalize language. And finally, number 12, an emphasis on proficiency-based assessments. Regardless of how we define our class, whatever we tell our students the goals are, the way we assess defines our class because it's important to students. It's not really that important to me. It's super important to students. The way we assess defines class. We cannot do all these 11 pillars I've been talking about before, where we emphasize communication, we emphasize processing ability, we don't worry so much about knowledge. We can't do all of that and then exclusively assess language knowledge. Knowledge can be a little part of our assessments, but the majority of our assessments are going to be evaluating those skills that we're trying to grow. We must assess skills. Now, this is an enormous topic. We could spend lots and lots of time talking about it. What that looks like for me, very quickly, I don't really have traditional tests. There's no, hey, unit 4 test is next Friday, study a lot for it. Studying is not a part of our culture. Studying is not what we do. We engage in class. And so I give little chunks. And a lot of this has come from AP. I really like the way AP has shifted assessment in my lower levels. I like the way AP fits into a CI program. But it's chunks. We'll do a reading assessment where they read and answer questions. It takes 10 minutes. That's it. A few days later, they may listen, answer questions. Sometimes they answer questions in English. Sometimes they answer multiple choice questions in Spanish. A lot of reading, because that's what our class is based on. Can you listen and comprehend? So we'll do a lot of listening, comprehending, reading, comprehending. Show me you can do that. We will do some writing. We will do some speaking. Speaking, just with the logistics of speaking, is difficult, so we don't do it as much. We do quite a bit of writing. Writing is one of the best ways for me to see where their skills are. Again, they are better at writing when they're getting more input. Now, when we do writing, I almost always offer several options of prompts. And sometimes it's you have so much time, right, in 10 minutes. Sometimes you have so many words you have to write. Sometimes you're retelling something as we saw it. Sometimes you're creating something. But there's always options. And I try to get students to buy into this idea that I just want to see your skill. I just want to see how well you can write. It's proficiency. It's a proficiency-based assessment. It's not about knowledge. Now, that grammar and vocabulary and things we've seen, the more you can show me of that's great. But I just want to see what you can put together and how you can write or how you can speak. That's a very quick, simple explanation. But we just have to make sure our assessments match what we're doing in class. Now, here's my gift I talked about at the beginning. It actually goes along with this last point here. Everything has a purpose. This is important in assessment. It's important in everything we do. There is a sheet here that I have found to be very useful with this idea of everything has a purpose. We do it. Actually, we've done it a couple times this year in my level 3 classes. It's really something I should come back to in every class I teach. We do it in English. I tell students to be honest. Sometimes I don't even collect it. Like they just do it for themselves. It's in English. It says your grade in Spanish is a result of your skills in Spanish and not the task you complete. We might tell them this. We need to tell them it over and over and over, because almost every other class they go to is about knowledge and tasks and points and homework. And that's fine. That works. Some of their Spanish classes are built on those systems. Some of that I still can't get away from because it's tough. But repeat to them. If you can read, listen, write, and speak well, not perfect, not native, not anywhere near native, not like me. But if you can do those things at your level, you get a good grade. That's what your grade's based on. And I put this silly little fake conversation because it was a real conversation I've had several times. Profe, how do I improve my grade? Get better at Spanish. And they always laugh at that. But like, why is that funny? That's the answer. How do I get better at Spanish? Everything we do in class is designed for you to engage with the language and improve your skills. You can have this sheet. You can change this to whatever language you want, or, change, remove that, change any of these. But they answer these honestly. Always, usually, not often, never. When we listen to a song, I follow along every word. When Profe tells a joke, I listen to every word. When we read something, I follow along. I ask questions, blah, blah, blah. I talk a lot. I answer questions. When there's a video assignment, I watch it closely, be sure I understand. I focus on everything. I read extra outside of class. I have this light that I use where they're not allowed to speak English when it's on. I speak Spanish when the light is on. I speak Spanish even when the light is not on. And so on and so on. Trivia questions, I try to understand the entire description. So you can edit this, make this whatever it is that you do. And this is big. When Profe talks, I listen. When other students speak Spanish, I listen to them. It's that constant listening. And so trying to get them to understand that this is what leads to better skills and this is what leads to a better grade. At the bottom, I put, if your skills are not as high as you'd like, look anywhere here where it's not usually or always or not always, and do it always. And then I put this here. If you still feel behind, which that happens, read. If your skills are behind where they should be, read. Use Flangu. Go to the simplest books in Flangu and read there first. I have a bunch of books in my classroom. Take those books. There's nothing too easy. Take the simplest book there and read, and then move on. Unfortunately, that's not the answer they want sometimes. That's the right answer. But they want, like, how am I getting extra points and so on. But again, it's his mindset. It's his getting them to buy into the idea that you have to improve your skills. So that is yours. That's your gift to use. Again, it's been very valuable for me over the years. We are 7:47. There is, again, my website here where you can contact me. I do have lots of books. They're in Spanish. If you're not a Spanish teacher, sorry. But I do have a lot of books. This one is coming out next week. It's a graphic novel about baseball. Lots of other books that are available. If you're interested, I would love to help you if you have questions about this or anything CI, no matter where you're at in that process. I'd love to help. And so now we have some time for some questions. I have not looked at the chat.
I was going to say the chat right now is tremendously huge because there was a lot of conversation happening in the chat. So rather than have you go through the entire chat looking for questions, I'm going to go ahead and open it up now for a Q&A. And so if anybody has a question, now would be a great time to either raise your hand and then we can unmute you, or you can unmute yourself and you can ask a question. Or put your questions now in the chat. Even if you asked them already earlier, post them in there now, just so we can keep them kind of all together in one place, and we'll know, okay, from like this point forward, these are the questions we want to ask Bryan. Oh, and here they come.
Oh boy. I'm going to put a link very quickly. I'm going to put a link to that last little reflection sheet in here. I think that you should be able to copy and use. Okay, sorry. Do you want to read them, Chuck, or do you want me to look at the chat?
Oh, no. You can take a look at the chat if you want.
Okay. Yep. Okay, and I'm going to have to maybe go backwards. What about colleagues that aren't on board with CI? Excuse me. And a department that requires you to follow a curriculum? Great question. There's a couple things. First of all, if you have a department with lots of teachers, I think it's important for teachers to teach the way that they can teach best. So if a colleague isn't comfortable teaching with CI, they shouldn't teach with CI. And if you are, you should. As far as it being accepted or maybe trying to change the minds of colleagues, the best thing you can do is try to show that it's working. Show that students want to take the classes, show that they're skilled. And again, you have to demonstrate their skills. Demonstrate that, okay, maybe they don't have this knowledge. Maybe they're not traditionally the same as other students, but they can do this. Take videos or have them talk to other class or whatever. Demonstrate the skills of the students that are in your class to try to at least open the minds of your department. If you are forced to do like common assessments or you're forced to follow a curriculum, sometimes you just have to do that, and you just can do CI whenever you can. Like if it's not ideal, but if it's part of a week or it's after you finish another unit or something, just start to do it and start to see how students react to it, and then start to try to show that to those in your department. Okay. I wonder if you have any good ways to teach vocabulary and how to help students to memorize them. Good. Repetition. So again, simple lists of 3 to 4 vocabulary structures at a time, and then just repetition. I do that with stories. You can do it with reading. Personal questions go a long way, either written, ask them to connect that vocabulary word to something personal in their lives and answer a question, or just talking. That goes a long way. Beyond that, I use things like Quizlet and Text-of-8 and those kind of things to practice. I think that's fine. I think that's fine to do that a little bit to kind of internalize it more and then use it later. Link to student self-assessment won't open. Let me work on that in a minute here.
I think we got that one figured out, though. I think that one's working.
Thank you. All right,
we're good.
How do you handle absenteeism, especially due to COVID quarantines? That's tough. It's tough because input is happening in class and students are missing that. Try to get them to understand that they need to be there. Reading goes a long way in that. If they're missing something, hopefully they can read it. If they miss a long period of class, give them things they can read. It is tough. It is one of the tough. I mean, it's tough in any class, but with providing input, if they're not there, they're just not getting the same amount of input. So sometimes students need to understand that idea too. Okay, I'm an AP teacher and love to hear more about how you meld CI and AP skill building. Maybe that's something, if you want to send me an email, we can talk about later. For me, I think CI leads in the levels going up to AP. It leads really well. As you get to AP, there is definitely more output because that's part of the exam and part of what you're getting ready for. But you're still getting some input, and the steps along the way, input is super important. But yeah, we still do the test practice. We still do a lot of the AP things. Yes, I'll share the list of high frequency actions. My district does not approve Flangu. What other resources can I use to have students read? One thing I did once was this was before Flangu existed. I made my own internet free reading list. Like I just found a bunch of websites. Now this wasn't necessarily stories. It was more websites like Sports Illustrated in Spanish or computer games in Spanish. And I made this list that students could read off of. The other thing is to build a classroom library. That takes time and that takes money, but you can start to do that slowly. Someone asked, do I have a true beginner novel? If you look at that, I'm not sharing. If you look at my book, the one that says Perdidos en la Traducción, that is a level 1 novel. It may be later in the year, level 1, so maybe it's not true beginner, but that was a book I actually, during the pandemic shutdown, I had a colleague who was pregnant, and I was trying to help her class as well as my classes. And so we wrote this simple book. Okay, aside from Flangu, where are you getting sources that they read? Good question. I create a lot of what they read. Over the years, I have a lot of like short readings that we do that are a page. I like that kind of short chunks of reading, sometimes even more than a novel. Sometimes we do novels too, but sometimes I like those short chunks. So I create a lot of things based on the units that we do. Other than that, I'm looking online again, classroom sets of books are good, but yeah. And then the other thing is reading is not always just stories and books. Trivia, I see someone here mention something about trivia. Trivia is reading. Like when we do that, it's always something that they're reading as they're doing it. So it's also trying to find other ways to get reading in that aren't necessarily stories and books. Someone said, I'd like to know more about incorporating culture into your practice. Can you give an example? That's where reading comes in a lot too. Trivia, let me say two things. Trivia, we do every week, we do a trivia question. Every class sees the same question, they answer it. The class that gets it right gets a point. At the end of the year, they get a pizza party or whatever. That's culture almost every week. That's different cultural things that we talk about. Then reading, I wrote a lot of stories for the Voces Nuestra Historia in Spanish. And so we use a lot of those, and those are all culturally based. So we read a lot of that. We also then just incorporate videos and readings that are from authentic materials. When you do trivia, where do you find these? Yeah, that's the battle every week. I look at CNN in Espanol, and I look for stories and I try to find questions there. Just over the years, I actually send me an email, remind me. If you're a Spanish teacher and you're interested, that I can send you past year trivia things. We do Geoguesser. I don't know if that is. It's like a geography thing where you're trying to guess where you're at in different Spanish speaking countries. I just look for cultural things and ask questions about them. News. Okay. Yeah, Encanto is great to use now. In a future class, would you be willing to share unit plans? Yes. Yes. Let me make a note of that. Maybe that's something I can share. I'm sorry. I kind of went in a different order here. If I missed your question, I'm sorry. Is there anybody that wants to ask a question?
Yeah, I was going to ask that. Is there anybody who actually wants to ask a question not in the chat? Anybody who wants to unmute their microphone and ask a question in person?
Can I hit one question here before we do that? Looks like Sandra Lee asked, what about being observed when the administrator wants to see more student output than teacher output? Which is a great question, because CI can appear to be very teacher-centered, which is a bad word for a lot of administrators. And again, at my school, I've been extremely blessed to have great administrators. Like, we've had different lead principals and assistant principals that have been in charge of our observation over the last few years. They have been awesome about wanting to understand language, because they're not experts in world language. They're great administrators. They know what good classrooms look like, but they don't know what good world language teaching looks like. And so they've been willing to hear from us and understand the value of input. I had a couple, or at least one, that went to like workshops about CI because he wanted to understand what we were doing. So the first step in that is trying to get your administrators to understand why you're doing what you do. A lot of the stuff that we just talked about tonight, show that to them and let them understand that language class is a little different. If you know they're coming, that can be a day where you do have a little student output. The other thing that I get every time an administrator comes to my class is, wow, the students are so engaged. Like, I don't see that in other classes. They're so engaged in what you're doing in your class, and they love it. And they don't understand what's happening in the class because it's all Spanish, and they love that. Our administrators love seeing that. So I don't know, maybe that's not a good answer because I've just been lucky to have really good administrators. But one of the things that really helps with those is just to just to have good engaging classes, just to be good at CI, is to really work on it a lot and get students excited about it as class numbers grow and students grow and AP test scores go higher and higher. And I know that takes a long time, but get administrators on board with what you're doing. Okay, sorry. Are there any other questions? Live questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
So let's just say you give the students a story to read, or you tell the story verbally to the students. What kind of like scaffolds have you given them besides maybe a short vocab list for them to reference, for them to understand what the heck you're saying or what they're reading?
Okay, we're going to talk a lot about that next month in the reading thing. Or is it 2 months? But vocabulary is very important. Getting them to understand vocabulary. Doing simplified versions of, like, if you know what embedded readings are, where you simplify the reading first and read all the main ideas of it. Adapting readings, looking at the reading and seeing what my students wouldn't know and maybe taking some parts out or crossing parts out. Acting it out so students can see it. And that's where you kind of have some differentiation, because you may have some students that understand every single word of what you're reading, and you may have some students that understand 90% of what you're reading, but they understand what you're acting out or what you're really highlighting and saying for that. When it comes to speaking, when I speak to students, when we do things that are speaking, it's about putting them in manageable situations. Like, I'm not going to use vocabulary that they don't know. If it's a video or something, you just have to be really clear about what the goal is. A lot of times I'll say, okay, we're going to watch this video. You might not understand it all. See what you can pick out. Don't get intimidated if you don't understand all this. So it's kind of about setting the stage and then preparing them. But again, we'll get into a lot of that next time.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What do you do when you have students who pretty much refuse to respond in the target language? How do you go about with that?
Okay. Refuse to respond in the target language, or refuse to like take part in class at all, or both?
Kind of both, but definitely refuse to respond in the target language.
Yeah. I don't require them to respond in the target language all the time until AP. In AP, they're not allowed to speak English at all. In other classes, I mentioned that light. I have that light where I'll turn it on and they talk with a partner and they have to speak Spanish. If they don't, they get penalized. But those are very manageable situations. Otherwise, I encourage Spanish. Most kids it's the culture and they just start to speak Spanish when they're ready. Some kids they're just not comfortable with it, or they're not comfortable with it as soon as others. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. Now, as they get older and more into some of the upper levels, I'll try to push them to use Spanish, and you got to be careful that they're not distracting class with their English as well. But I don't penalize that, especially early on. I don't know if that helps. If that's what you're kind of asking. I speak Spanish. I speak Spanish all the time. Like, I'm going to speak Spanish all the time. There are certain times where you get penalized for speaking English. For the most part, it's just the culture. It's just what everybody does. If you say something in English, that's okay. I might repeat it in Spanish, or, yeah.
Bryan, I think what I'm going to do, because we've hit the 8 o'clock mark here, I'm going to post a link in the chat right now. And the link goes to the video that we're actually recording right now. That's up on Facebook. Which is going to be a great place for people to post more questions. So click that link, head over to Facebook. You can post additional questions to Bryan. And then, Bryan, if you want, you can either answer those questions directly on Facebook, or I'll copy paste them over to you and send them over to you in an email.
Okay.
That way you can answer several of them in a row, and then I can post those responses there. So that'll be a great place. If anybody has additional questions for today's presentation, head on over to Facebook, post your questions there, and that way we can get to those.
Do participants here have access to the chat once this ends? Do you know?
I don't think so. No, I
Okay.
think once
Okay.
this ends, then the chat goes away.
Yeah. Okay. I was gonna say there are some, and you've probably seen already. There are a lot of resources, things that others have suggested in the chat that are
There
good too.
are, and they're
Yeah.
really, really good. If anybody gets a chance, I do hope that you will go over to Facebook and repost a lot of those in the comments for this video, because it'll be a great place for a lot of teachers, especially those that couldn't make the presentation today, to make them available in the comments there for the video on Facebook. And I can copy paste a lot of those in the YouTube video that's going to be up later.
Thank you so
Hopefully
much.
all that made sense.
Yeah. And I've just checked. So next month is March 24th, and it's about target language use. The reading one is the following. It's April. But yeah, thank you so much for your attention and so many of you being here. And hopefully you'll see you in March. And I hope I can get to some other questions and things. And yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank
Everybody.
you.
Flangoo.com